A History of Religion in 5.5 Objects. Chapter 3. Incense. Oil and incense gladden the heart, and the sweetness of a friend is better than one's own counsel. Proverbs 27:9. There is a familiar story in the Christian tradition about a few wise men, magicians of a sort, who discerned star signs and similar celestial occurrences. One night they are led by an exceptionally bright star to pay a visit to a special child born in the Roman-occupied town of Bethlehem. Like the much earlier visitation of seers to the infant Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha, these wise men also saw it written across the sky that this child was going to be a world changer, a king. And so they brought the now well-known gifts, gold, frankincense and myrrh. 2,000 years later, only one of these might be found on Santa's wish list. Gold has been a relatively stable commodity over the millennia and across the world, valued by kings who kill for it, worn by women willing to pay good money for it, sought by athletes who train for years to have it hang around their necks, and seen as a sign of sacred status as it embellishes texts, ritual implements and holy sites. Gold sets a standard, and global economies are linked to its value. In contrast, frankincense and myrrh come from harsh desert climes, where the oozing wounds of scrubby trees are processed and ultimately burned to offer an aroma in a variety of social settings. Burning tree embers seem a bit dim in light of the gleam of gold, yet so strong was the ancient desire for specific scents, and so far from our contemporary sensual interests, that incense was offered as a gift fit for a king. Incense is often called food of the gods, reflecting the belief that it emerges from the realms of the gods, and thus we are to make offerings of sweet smells back to them. In Mesoamerica, copal is the name of incense burned at various rituals, and the story is told about how at one point the gods gathered and cast themselves into a pit of live coals. From this was produced the sun and moon, bringing light to the world. The gods became incense, and thus was light created. In the Iroquois and other Native American traditions, the Creator gave 4 gifts to the people: sweetgrass, sage, cedar and tobacco. The 4 gifts correspond to the 4 directions. They're made into braids and then burned to accompany prayers and smudging ceremonies. On the other side of the world, as we will see later in this chapter, Agni, the Vedic god of fire, has incense burned for him in order to reconstitute his body, which had been mythically dismembered. And the deities of Babylon, Egypt, Israel, Japan and elsewhere all have long-standing relations to burning substances, as smoke and smell are offerings that connect the here below to that up above. Yet over the past few centuries, incense has become more accessible to more people, becoming widespread outside temples, and the smells linger in homes and streets from Mumbai to Miami, Singapore to Senegal. It is used not only in worship settings, but also for purification, protection, healing, memory, marking time, and creating space, as we shall see through this chapter. Sacred and profane objects are not always easily separable, and questions emerge about how set apart a thing should be to be considered holy. The smell of certain substances can change our life in minor ways, like feeling relaxed in the presence of lavender, or in more drastic ways, as in the story of Marcel Proust's whiff of a Madeleine, setting him on a writing journey that uncovered elements of his past life long forgotten. When I was writing my PhD dissertation in Atlanta, I walked to and from the university's library through a park. The foliage was lush, and in the summertime the honeysuckle vines that climbed over fences and choked out small shrubs, beaten only by the kudza, would produce small yellow-orange flowers. I could smell the flowers long before I saw them. The aroma was sweet and intense, and mixed with the sultry Georgia air, permeated my nostrils and seemingly my whole body. It was like taking a bath in sugar. On the way home from a long day, feeling tired and a little sweaty, the smell halted me in my tracks. This was no passive rose saying, "Stop and smell me." This was a flower that made me stop. I was helpless against it. I breathed deep, letting go of the receding day. The tension in my shoulders subsided, my chest expanded. It wasn't necessarily a light feeling that I had, but the fragrance changed to me. Neuroscientists and psychologists tell us that the olfactory system is made up of some of the most ancient machinery in the sensing body. Unlike the other senses, olfactory nerves head straight for the limbic system and directly trigger the amygdala, a small region of the medial temporal lobes in the brains of higher vertebrates like primates. Here, memories are processed and emotions are born. Smell touches our species' deep desires and fears. Among others, Rachel Hertz at Brown University has shown how smell triggers a greater emotional response than other sense perceptions. And like Proust, our autobiographical knowledge is shaped by scent. We know ourselves by our smells as they transport us to the past through a present experience. The blind and deaf Helen Keller once stated, "Smell is a potent wizard that transports us across thousands of miles and all the years we've lived." And the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau related smell to memory and desire, claiming, "Smell is the sense of the imagination. As it gives tone to the nerves, it must have a great effect on the brain." Walking into sacred spaces like temples, mosques and churches, several sensual actions are often undertaken that mark the passage from profane space to sacred space. Recall that profane is not a negative term, but synonymous with the everyday, the quotidian. It comes from the Latin profanus, meaning literally that which is outside the temple. Muslims and Shinto practitioners, for instance, will use water to wash hands, face and mouth, while Roman Catholics perform the more symbolic action of dipping fingers into holy water and touching the forehead. Other spaces are noted by taking off one's shoes, bowing or genuflecting or ringing a bell. These motions are performed so that our bodies can tell our minds that it is time to focus. We're trained through our senses. Objects and spaces educate us. When we walk into a space for a religious ceremony, a key trigger is the smell of incense. It changes our attitudes, it changes our actions. Incense is used in a striking number of places across the world in a variety of religious traditions. As we purify ourselves and get ready to leave the dust of the profane world behind, we also begin to smell the burning of various materials. While incense is the main subject here, we might also remember that perfume too has its roots in a similar activity. Perfume literally means through burning, from the Latin fumare. Scents change our moods, or put us in the mood, affecting our appetites and libidos, our mindful and prayerful interests, our ways of thinking, acting and feeling, our engagement with the past and prospects of the future, just as they place us in time and space that is deeply present. Along with food and sex, not in contrast to them, smells also get us in the mood for worship. Does holiness have a scent? And if so, does it smell like flowers, fresh cut grass, cooking food, rain in the desert, the top of a newborn baby's head? History gives us one clear answer, and that is the wide-ranging use of frankincense for sacred means. Frankincense is also known as olibanum and dupe in India, from the Old French franc means pure or of high quality, while the name olibanum stems from the Arabic roots luban, indicating whiteness, thus implying purity. Frankincense, then, is the true incense. Records indicate that the ancient Babylonian temple of Baal burned 2.5 tons of frankincense every year. Egyptian mythologies say that it came to Egypt via the phoenix, and pellets of it were found in King Tutankhamun's tomb. The Roman historian Pliny reports the Roman Emperor Nero to have burned one entire year's crop of it at his wife's funeral. At athletic events hosted by King Antiochus Epiphanes in ancient Syria, almost 2 centuries before the birth of Christ, spectators were given gifts of frankincense and myrrh at the conclusion of the games, in a gesture of hospitality. If our contemporary associations with incense reach no further than hippies and some smelly stuff at churches, we might begin to realise how much our sensual worlds have changed since the birth of Jesus. Frankincense is derived from trees of the genus Boswellia. native to the southern Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa, in landscapes notoriously rife with venomous snakes. Harvesting entails etching the outer bark of the tree so that a milky white resin drips out, dries and crystallizes. The crystals are collected, cured in caves and sold. Because of the material's sacred nature, the ancient gathering of it was performed within a ritualistic framework. It is a labour-intense process that has continued relatively the same way for thousands of years. The harvesting and selling of the material has long been part of the economic framework of the Arabian Peninsula, paving the way for the incense trail and the financial infrastructure that made the Prophet Muhammad's hometown, Mecca, a bustling intersection of cultures, languages, goods and religious traditions. Frankincense has played a key role economically, architecturally, spiritually and sensually in Western religions, particularly in the history of Judaism. Along with the rest of the biblical book, Exodus 30 was probably written and compiled around 2,500 years ago, telling of an age another 1,000 years previous. Several centuries before the temple and the establishment of life in the Promised Land, we find, as part of the covenant that God enacted with Moses on Mount Sinai, the establishment of the ancient Israelites' central worship space, the tabernacle. This meeting tent was portable and transported across the Sinai desert as the people wandered in the wilderness. As the home for the Holy of Holies, in which sat the Ark of the Covenant, strict details were given for architectural structure and interior design. Next to a table for showbread, the importance of incense is made clear, establishing it as a central aspect of worship of the one true God. The Lord said to Moses, "Take sweet spices, stacte and onycha and galbanum, sweet spices with pure frankincense, for each shall there be an equal part, and make an incense blended as by the perfumer, seasoned with salt, pure and holy. And you shall beat some of it very small, and put part of it before the testimony in the tent of meeting, where I shall meet with you. It shall be for you most holy. And the incense which you shall make according to its composition, you shall not make for yourselves, it shall be for you holy to the Lord. Whoever makes any like to it as perfume, to use as perfume, shall be cut off from his people." God provides a secret recipe to be used only in this one setting for this one purpose. This mixture is holy, sacred, kadosh. Regulations regarding the practice of burning incense offerings were strict, as the Israelites would one day witness. On this occasion, Moses' brother Aaron had been consecrated as high priest, and his priestly sons Nadab and Abihu offered a strange fire before the Lord. And fire came forth from the presence of the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. A harsh justice for a seemingly slight slip in ritual etiquette, creating a textual passage on which many a scholar, rabbi and theologian has stumbled. Whatever else it suggests, we find the often dangerous power of the sacred and the constraints through which ritual and space are established. If we moderns imagine a ritual sacrifice, we tend to think of meat, the offering of animals, but ancient texts and rituals continually place the burning of incense and the burning of meat side by side, meaning that incense itself is a sacrifice, and thus also highly valued. Just as a lamb for slaughter had to be pure, so too was the incense to be pure, and sometimes the flesh and the incense were offered up together. Leviticus, too, instructs the priests to put oil and frankincense on the meat offering and burn it all together. Herodotus tells of a more involved mix of meat and scent in the Egyptian mode of sacrifice, in which the young ox is prepared with a stuffing made from consecrated bread, honey, raisins, figs, frankincense and myrrh. And when archaeologists uncovered the temple at Tenochtitlan in present-day Mexico, they found sacrificial stone knives that had a special copal ball on the hilt, very directly mixing the fleshy sacrifice and incense. Discussing the offerings prescribed in the Torah, the great philosopher, physician and rabbi Maimonides suggested a practical reason for the burning of incense. The aroma counteracted the smell of animals slaughtered for sacrifice, with their entrails cut open, making the place stink like an abattoir. If there had not been a good smell, he says in the Guide for the Perplexed, let alone if there had been a stench, it would have produced in the minds of the people the reverse of respect. For our heart generally feels elevated in the presence of good odour and is attracted by it, but it abhors and avoids bad smell. Here and throughout the Guide, the medieval sage gives practical interpretations of the seemingly obscure requirements of Levitical law, offering a pragmatic apology. The severe codes for worship are there to enhance basic sensual dimensions of religious practices. When one sees and sniffs within the great temple, he says certain emotions are produced in him. The special recipe remained with the Israelites after they settled into the land on the east shores of the Mediterranean, established a monarchy, and began work on the great Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. As in the tabernacle, incense is given a prime place, and two main altars were established, the altar of burnt offering and the altar of incense. Offerings made according to the recipe given earlier were burned twice a day as the priest lit candles, and on Yom Kippur, the high priest was required to burn incense in the censer within the Holy of Holies, not just on the altar outside. The tremendous nature of the temple was such that the Queen of Sheba travelled to visit. She was overwhelmed, presenting King Solomon with gifts of gold, precious stones and spices. According to various passages in the ancient oral tradition, collected and codified as the Mishnah, the Abtinus family oversaw the secret incense recipe to be used in rituals during the time of the Second Temple. One of their claims to fame was that they could mix up a recipe to produce a stream of smoke that shot straight up like a pole, hit the ceiling, spread and descend around the room, creating a vaporized version of a palm tree. Their family secret was kept intact, and many tried but failed to imitate this bit of pyrotechnics. Partly because of the secrecy of the recipe, today we have no clear idea what is meant by two of the four main ingredients, onchia, Hebrew shekeleth, or stakte, Hebrew natav. Arguments have ranged from onchia being part of a mollusk or part of a rock rose or possibly even amber, while the 11th century Talmudic sage Rashi argued that it was a benzoin taken from a root in the ground. Stakte seems to have been a plant resin, but of which plant is unclear. Secret knowledge often gives way to mystical dimensions. The economy of mysticism runs on the currency of secrecy. As esoteric elements within Judaism developed and Kabbalistic literatures spread, the presence of incense and smoke was seen to contain forces for mystical unification, synthesis of contrasting energies. The Zohar, the collected literature in the mystical tradition of Kabbalah, indicates how the smoke of offerings conjoins the up above with the down below, meanwhile uniting male and female principles as well as purifying. Incense smoke precedes and thus underlies everything. Indeed, we read Rabbi Yossi's comments that incense does more than prayer by creating unity and bringing light and removing filth from the world. According to the Zohar, not only does the actual offering of the incense work its wonders, but also the words surrounding incense have power. Simply reciting the incense recipe from Exodus is powerful enough to help fight off death, including that brought by the plague. The literature even indicates how the ancient priests saw the letters of the holy name emerging in the rising smoke of the offering. Holy incense can destroy evil influences. Nothing is as effective as incense for doing away with death in the world. For incense is the connecting of judgment with mercy, with the sweet savour in the nostrils, says the Zohar. Not only that, but without Kabbalistic traditions, reading and studying about the ingredients and preparing incense will protect one from illness. Similarly, in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, incense burning is prescribed for the safety of the souls of the departed as they move towards heaven, while the earliest Japanese accounts of incense use place it at sites of funerals. Pragmatic logic mixes with sacred sentiment. Beyond the olfactory sensation, the burning of incense in sacred sites has a visual logic. Smoke rises, and since the gods and goddesses reside in the heavens above, the incense ascends to meet them. King David makes the vertical analogy of worship and smoke. Let my prayer be counted as incense before thee, and the lifting up of my hands as an evening sacrifice. Smoke from incense and burnt offerings become lines of communication with the deities. Precisely because incense is so holy, contains so much power, it is not generally burned today in Jewish holy places for ritual purposes. As the first and second temples were the central sacred sites for ancient Judaism, the space of synagogues have typically been seen as distinct places of gathering, learning, and prayer. Offerings, including the incense offering, are not made here. The destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in 70 CE also entailed, in essence, the end of the incense offering. Some Orthodox Jewish communities continue to claim that they kept the secret recipe safe and will make it again if the temple is ever rebuilt. Try to grab smoke and it vanishes. Take a sniff and it lodges in the nostrils, shooting signals up through olfactory nerves and into the limbic region of the brain. But eventually the smells dissipate, exciting the nose and the conscious mind alike. Smoke, like light, paradoxically can be seen but not possessed. It can pass in and out of our sensing bodies, but it cannot be held. Smoke is physically sensed and spiritually suggestive. There is a reason ghosts and spirits are often portrayed looking like wisps of smoke. Theologically, light and smoke are not possessible objects, and therefore sidestep prohibitions on representing divinity, even as they remain within reach. Yet smoke possesses us, affecting our sense of space, memory, and feelings of pleasure and pain. Not all people through history have delighted in smoke and scents the way the God of the Torah did. The concern in many cases, particularly in later monotheistic traditions, has to do with the tangible, object-centred aspect of worship. This smacks of idolatry, since the God of Christianity, Islam and post-exilic Judaism has tended to be utterly transcendent and immaterial. To offer material goods to an immaterial God is problematic, not because people are worshipping the smoke, as might be the concern with images, but burning offerings indicates an external form of worship, when what God seemingly wants is an interior, contrite heart. Religious reformers' arguments against material rituals assert that external expressions move in the wrong directions. We should be cultivating an interior spiritual life instead of an exterior one. A few centuries after the incense altar and the golden age of Israel, the prophet Isaiah bespeaks a God in which incense is an abomination, and Jeremiah worries over and over about the people burning incense to other gods, particularly Baal. King Solomon himself made such concerns legitimate. According to the book of 1 Kings, Solomon loved the Lord, built the great temple in Jerusalem, and burned incense to God. Yet he also built incense altars to the gods of some of his 700 wives who came from other lands and were devotees of Moloch, Chemosh, and other deities. Later, Pliny, born within Jesus' lifetime, expressed his own concerns. He was disturbed to see the wastefulness of all these burnt offerings within Roman pagan rituals. Remember Nero's burning an entire year's crop at his wife's funeral. As Christianity emerged out of its pagan and Jewish roots, its leaders renounced the use of incense. If burning sacrifices offer a pleasing odour to the Lord of Genesis, Exodus and Leviticus, a millennium and a half later, St. John Chrysostom would reverse such anthropomorphic tendencies and declare, God has no nostrils. The highly influential Christian theologian Origen, writing in the 3rd century CE, suggested that one clear way to distinguish Christians from pagans was by the burning of incense. Jesus Christ, Origen claimed, will defend us from the earth spirits intent on lust and blood and sacrificial odours and strange sounds and other sensual things. Origen interpreted many of the physical activities outlined in the early Jewish scriptures and turned them into metaphors so that burning incense became an interior condition and not entirely to do with actual fire. Another great theologian of the time, Tertullian, scolded that burning odours are idolatrous. Writing to his wife, he laid out an ethical and behavioural guideline for her, indicating that the handmaid of God will be agitated by the odour of incense. The new tradition called Christianity began to coalesce and create its own unique identity, and so certain symbolic objects and actions needed to be left behind. New religious movements and reformations often bring with them a purging of sensual ritual activities, claiming to aspire to something higher, by which is meant something more interior. And the emerging church was no exception. Roman emperors similarly saw the use of incense as a method of marking identity. Though from the other perspective, Christians refused to make offerings to Roman gods, as was the custom for citizens of the age. One better-known story recounts Habib, a deacon in the local church in the early 4th century, who refused to make offerings, including the burning of frankincense, for Zeus. For his act of civil disobedience, Habib was executed, becoming one of many early martyrs for the still persecuted religion. In a curious poetic homily exalting the martyrdom, a 6th century bishop in Syria named Mar Jacob sings the praises of Habib, reworking the death so that Habib becomes a burnt sacrifice and the smell of his burnt flesh becomes incense to God. And there rose up the sweet perfume of the martyr. John of Ephesus gives another obviously odoured 6th century account. Best known today for his works Ecclesiastical History and Lives of Eastern Saints, John recounts some controversies surrounding the emerging doctrine of the Trinity. Mainly it hinged, as does so much in Christianity, on the dual nature of Jesus Christ, his full divinity and full humanity. Some claimed that if Jesus were actually 2 parts, then there was not 3 but 4 parts of the Godhead. Those who detracted from the dual nature Christology carried this out to its logical extreme, calling those who saw 2 natures in Christ believers in a quaternity, not a trinity. Because of the seeming absurdity of this, many simply said Jesus was just one in nature, and they came to be called the monophysites, ultimately coming out on the bottom of the theological tussle. In spite of their logic about not having another part of the Trinity, they were persecuted by the emerging Orthodox consensus confirmed by councils in the 4th century and later. In Lives of Eastern Saints, John discusses the heretics, those who opposed the dual nature creed and who were thus thrown into fire, noting that the smoke wafted to heaven and seemed to please God. The God of the early Christians did not want incense sacrificed, but martyrs and heretics seemed to be an acceptable sacrifice at times. Human bodies became smouldering censers. With such early resolve against offerings, it would seem that incense would have been swept away forever and not have some part of the Christian tradition. But walk into churches around the world today, and that pungent air tells a different story. In spite of notions that God wants an interior, contrite heart, we are externally, sensually motivated beings. The very fact that early church leaders had to continually speak out against the use of incense surely implies that the practice continued among many people who called themselves Christian. After all, there is no need to denounce something that doesn't exist. Around the same time as Habib's incensed martyrdom, Constantine rose to power, famously converted to Christianity, and issued the Edict of Milan, offering tolerance of all religions across his empire. Many of Constantine's changes regarded the style and space of worship, and material evidence shows the use of censers across the Roman Church in the age of the great emperor. Even though he converted, his Roman pagan background continued to filter through his worship practices. As Christianity became legal, the previous pagan spices and censers were made available to Christian churches. By the medieval period, with Christianity well established across Europe, the Mediterranean and beyond, incense was put to widespread use in churches, basilicas and cathedrals. 6 centuries after Constantine, many miles to the north, Prince Vladimir of Kiev underwent his own conversion, turning from the traditional Nordic pagan rites of his homeland to the new Christian religion still unfurling across Europe and into Western Asia. As he was acquiring new land, wives and concubines, Vladimir and his forces decided to make a sacrifice to the gods. A human sacrifice. The lot fell to a young boy named Ioan, whose father, Fyodor, stood up against the sacrifices and their idolatrous actions. Fyodor was a Christian, and he openly assailed pagan ways. As might be expected, this act led to his death and his sons. According to historical reports from the time, Fyodor's accusations nonetheless left a mark on Prince Vladimir and became a turning point for his moving beyond pagan traditions. Fyodor and Jan, Theodore and John, eventually became known as the first martyrs of the Russian Church. Like Constantine before him, Vladimir eventually made Christianity the official state religion, but before that happened, he did some cross-cultural research in the form of sending envoys to neighbouring countries to investigate their religious traditions. In an early act of interfaith dialogue, he encouraged his people to respect the various faiths and see what might be learned from them. He also seemed to realise the political potential of religious alliances. Envoys went to see the Muslim Bulgars, the Germans and the Greeks. Somewhere along the way, Vladimir heard from a contingent of Jews as well. The historical compilation, the Russian Primary Chronicle, attributed to the historian monk Nestor, reports that the first 2 visits were not so positive. The Bulgar bows, sits down, looks hither and thither like one possessed, and there is no happiness among them, but instead only sorrow and a dreadful stench. Their religion is not good. Then we went among the Germans and saw them performing many ceremonies in their temples, but we beheld no glory there. Since the 3rd time's a charm, the visit to the Greeks led them to the grand city of Constantinople and to the vast expanse of the Hagia Sophia. The patriarch there knew how to put on a show, getting the clergy to assemble in their splendid garments in the resplendent space, getting the choir to sing and incense to burn. The report of the envoys recounts this: for on earth there is no such splendour or such beauty, and we are at a loss how to describe it. We only know that God dwells there among men, and their service is fairer than the ceremonies of other nations. For we cannot forget that beauty. Here is the start of the Russian Orthodox Church, and indeed modern Russia itself, born from sensual encounters with smells and spaces and singing. Something smells fishy about this setup. I smell a rat. Our metaphorical language suggests we can root our problems by detecting odours, and perhaps that we might find solutions through our sense of smell. Thus, the journalist has a nose for a good story, and the thrifty person has a nose for a bargain. The smells of incense in temples and churches purify, channel prayer and change our minds, while other smells offer discernment or judgment and lead people on. Like bloodhounds, we move, reverse direction, do something we didn't expect, and entire civilizations shift course from a few well-timed whiffs. While we can point to such linguistic examples still in use, the physical sense of smell has been downplayed in the modern world while vision has reigned supreme. The ongoing industrial and scientific revolutions spanning the 16th through the 20th centuries were built on the sense of sight, on visual observations and optical instruments that emerged hand in hand with modern science and knowledge. Telescopes, microscopes and printed books are 3 of the key objects that were developed during and in turn created modernity, and they're all visually engaged. Sigmund Freud conjectured that human evolution was due in part to a shift in the senses. We used to move on all fours, close to the ground and guided by smells. Anyone who has taken a dog for a walk knows what it's like to be steered by scent. But Homo erectus began the long revision of the primary sense organ from nose to eye and secondarily ear. Freud even linked sexual perversions to the more primitive influence of the olfactory system. The implications are clear. Smell is close to the ground, base, lowly and primitive. But we have lost our need for those vulgar abilities as we high-minded moderns stand up straight and survey the world in front of our eyes. We now turn up our nose at those below us. Since smell is attached to emotion and rationality is in opposition to feeling, there was another clear reason to revile the nose in the fetishistic rationality of the modern age. Preceding Freud were other Germanic philosophers, such as Immanuel Kant and Hegel, who likewise created a hierarchy of the senses, with the intimate senses of smell, touch and taste situated below seeing and hearing. Taking what seems like a benign philosophical charting of the sensorium further, one prominent 19th century naturalist, Lorenz Oken, even outlined a hierarchy of the senses based on race. The European related to the eye, the Asian to the ear, the Native American to the nose, the Melanesian to the tongue, and the African to the skin. The racist overtones later became implicated with the ongoing 19th century pseudoscientific practices such as physiognomy, much of which became tied to the search for the pure Aryan race, as will be discussed in the chapter on crosses. Today, as we reach the limits of what we can learn through a vision-based science, other senses are emerging as indicators of the human condition. The aromatherapy industry continues to move along on somewhat the same fringes as the past 2 centuries, yet now increasing numbers of scientific studies give evidence to the efficacy of scents as healing, mood-altering and mind-changing substances. IBM, among others, is investing millions in cognitive computers that can hear and see and smell. One promise suggests that computers, perhaps via smartphones or smartwatches, will one day be able to diagnose illness based on biomarkers in the breath. Meanwhile, dogs are being trained to sniff cancer cells in human bodies and are turning out to be surprisingly effective at it. If dogs discern through the nose, gods do so even more. Several passages throughout the Jewish and Christian scriptures play this out, pulling from the intertwined roots of the Hebrew words reach and ruach. The former generally refers simply to smell. The meaning and use of the latter varies from breath to wind to spirit, such as the ruach Elohim that hovered over the formless void, as described at the beginning of Genesis. Physiologically, it is difficult to breathe without simultaneously smelling, and the language of scriptures plays out bodily entanglement. A curious, oft-quoted passage in Isaiah 2 indicates that the prophesied Messiah stems from the root of Jesse. This is the Mashiach, in Greek Christos, the Anointed One, the King who will come and reign like King David before, allowing the lion and the lamb to lie down together. Isaiah prophesies that the Spirit, Ruach, and the Lord shall rest on him. The phrase could also be translated as the breath of the Lord shall rest on him. This Messiah will judge the righteous not by what he sees with his eyes or decide by what he hears with his ears, but rather, if one translates it literally, the language here is that he will delight in the odour of the Lord. Some translators even suggested the Messiah will be quick-scented, a leader who's got a nose for things. The 12th century Christian mystic Hildegard of Bingen comments on this passage by suggesting, "By our nose, God displays the wisdom that lies like a fragrant sense of order in all works of art, just as we ought to know through our ability to smell whatever wisdom has to arrange." The Christian New Testament continues in this way, as St. Paul suggests to the followers of Jesus Christ. "Through us spreads in every place the fragrance that comes from knowing him. For we are the aroma of Christ to God." Throughout Christianity until the modern period, smell has often been linked with holiness. There are accounts saying that upon the death of a saint, sweet smells wafted over the area. One of the most famous examples is Saint Teresa of Avila, who through her life was said to emit a pleasing fragrance. After her death in 1582, her body retained a particular scent for years to come and is connected with several healing miracles, especially as relics of her body were distributed across Europe, with some of these continuing to emit a sweet healing odour. Situated along the ancient trade routes of Arabia, the city of Mecca in the 6th century had a solid economic basis. Along with the varieties of goods passing through town came a potpourri of languages, outlooks, rituals and myths. A young man named Muhammad was born here in 570 CE, amid the diversity, and listened to the ways of the world, the stories from afar. When, in his 40th year, he began to hear the voice of God in the wilderness, he knew it to be the truth he had been looking for. Over the next 22 years of his life, he listened for more divine revelations. These would eventually be collected and written down and become known as the Quran. As he recited the revelations in Arabic, others became convinced of their truth as well, and Islam was born of the poetic tongue of the Prophet Muhammad alongside the spice root. Words and fragrances rise together. Frankincense and myrrh were the most common types of incense that had been making its way for centuries by caravan from the southern points of the Arabian Peninsula to the Mediterranean civilizations of the ancient Egyptians, the Greeks, the Roman Empire, and Israel. There were many other scents as well, perfumed and burned, that made the journey, and Muhammad himself was clearly interested in the importance of good smells. The Prophet's collected sayings and traditions, known as the Hadith, have numerous stories bespeaking the need for good smells in various matters of life. History has it that Muhammad's wife, Khadija, came from a family who traded in spices, and she is the one who recounts the story of people who came from Jummah, Friday prayer, smelling bad, presumably because they walked from afar in woolen clothes or came directly from their labours. From this experience began the emergence of ablutions and ultimately the construction of great baths that would become incorporated into mosque complexes. It is important not to smell bad when praying. With all that smell in the background, Islam nonetheless established itself without recourse to external accessories of worship such as icons and incense. Like the fledgling Christian religion of a few centuries earlier, it attempted to focus inward. Clearly established rituals of cleanliness permeated the Quran, and the sayings and actions of the Prophet collected in the Hadith, but little space is devoted to seeking pleasant smells in everyday rituals. Those seem to be reserved for the pleasures of paradise, a great multi-sensual garden awaiting the faithful. Promises are made to people that paradise will be a nice-smelling land. Paradise has often been associated with the Garden of Eden, out of which came Adam and Eve after the fall. Some commentaries on the Quran indicate that they brought with them a few things from the garden: the black stone, the rod of Moses, and incense. Yet regardless of the Quran's words, incense has been part of Muslim life in many times and places, sometimes for sacred purposes, sometimes for profane. Some miles from Muhammad's home lies the land of the nomadic Tuareg, traversing some of the harsher ecosystems on earth. These Berber people have existed for centuries in and around the western parts of the Sahara Desert, practicing a religion that combines ancient animistic activities with Islamic motivations and interests. Over the past couple of decades, the American anthropologist Susan Rasmussen has spent significant time with them in Niger and Mali. One dimension of their cultural life that has become intriguing to Rasmussen is the central role of the Tuareg smellscape. Scents become medicinally therapeutic, serve as mediums to the spirit world, offer protection and denote space, while they also mark fear and danger and can become taboo. There is a scented social code, with established uses of perfumes and incenses to signify hospitality and friendship, as well as courtship. During weddings, incense becomes paramount for the Tuareg as they mix and merge Islamic and animistic activities. Like all rites of passage, weddings indicate a change in social status for the initiates. The anthropologists Arnold van Gennep and Victor and Edith Turner have discussed this aspect as the liminal stage, a threshold arena betwixt and between regular time and space. I've heard rites of passage likened to a ligament, whose primary function is to bind bones together, as many of us who have had knee, ankle and wrist problems can attest. The joints are weak points in the body. The bones on this metaphor represent the stable stages of life. Like the ligament, the initiate at this in-between stage is vulnerable and in need of protection. He or she needs a brace. This is given in the form of amulets, prayers, spells, and other symbolic gestures and performances, enacted with communal support to enable the transition from one stage of life to another. Rituals around the world provide many examples of the use of fumigants, perfumes, and incense in transitional life passages. Along with the amulets that keep vigil over Tuareg bride and groom, but especially bride, is a constant burning of incense during the 8-day wedding ceremony. While the bride is a central focus of protection, many around her also become permeated with the smoke, absorbing it into their hair and clothing, thereby enhancing their immunity. Through these observations, Rasserman finds that scent is a metaphor for the evaporation and regeneration of the social and physical body, in addition to an enveloping of the person to protect him or her against danger. Maintaining oneself in good aroma, and for that matter, sharing it with others, is not simply a means of being personally attractive or socially nice. It is a matter of sanctity and sin, life and death. The metaphor is thoroughly situated within the lived social exchanges of the people. It is not mere ornamental flourish. Scents like those given off by incense construct the lives of those who come into contact with them and provide access and protection in light of new responsibilities in life and in face of death. On a late summer day, sticky and sweaty, I arrived in Vrindavan, India, shoulder to shoulder and nose to nose with a million other temporary residents. Unlike them, I was not on a pilgrimage, or I don't think I was. They'd come for Janmashtami, Krishna's birthday, much like Christians cluster in Bethlehem at Christmas. The much-loved deity, praised for his mischievous youth as much as his cosmic power, is celebrated here in the land of his mythical birth, the area known as Vraj. Diane Eck, Harvard scholar of Indian traditions, once claimed that India must be seen to be known. And so I had to come to watch them watching Krishna, to experience something of this curious religious devotion that I'd only read about in Eck's book, Darshan. She tells of visual exchanges between Hindu deities and worshippers, how the enlarged eyes of the sacred icons stare back at their viewers to enact a mutual gaze. Onlookers gain a blessing by looking to the temple and being looked at by the deities, in this case by a statue of the Lord Krishna, and in this case as part of a throng of thousands of others slowly passing before the centre of the temple's altar. I was new to India, and my landing in this place and this time merely coincidental. I had no idea it was the time for celebrating Krishna's birthday, but perhaps that was auspicious in itself. I heard bells and yells echoing through alleys and across the Yamuna River. I saw people and animals and buildings spectacularly old and astonishingly new, and I smelled smoke from burning things I didn't recognise. Certainly, India must be seen to be known, but it must also be touched and tasted and heard, and most definitely smelled, not only in worship but also throughout everyday life. India is sensed from the bright-coloured kumkum, vermilion and fresh flowers set out along outdoor markets, from the street food known as chaat, from the constant bells and buzzing and beeping across roads and fields, from the perpetual smoke of burning incense. On one level, the encounter with any new place is a shock to our senses, which become somewhat dulled by the daily habits of home. But for those of us outsiders who have been inside India, there seems to be something unique that piques the senses in ways unlike most anywhere else. This led one scholar to suggest that no account of India, from Kipling to the recent popular novels of MMK and the accounts of Geoffrey Morehouse, fails to evoke the peculiar smell of that subcontinent, half corrupt, half aromatic, a mixture of dung, sweat, heat, dust, rotting vegetation and spices. The intimate relationship between smell and the exotic. Strongly mixed with the aromatic smellscapes of rural and urban sites across the subcontinent is the wafting smoke from agabati, aga meaning aloes wood and bathi meaning stick. Store owners burn it in the mornings as they open their shops, taxi drivers burn it in front of their taxis, and the devout in temples all over wave burning incense as they perform their devotional puja to the deities. This creates an environment in many ways diametrically opposed to the strictures of the Jewish temple incense offering. Confined to the temple with a protected secret recipe, the sacred smells of the ancient Israelites were legitimized and regulated by religious authorities, keeping the sacred and their own social status safe and secure. This confinement was certainly buttressed by the costly price of incense, meaning that the average household could not afford to burn a substance valued at the level of gold. Nowadays, due to agricultural and industrial revolutions, the making and marketing of incense has reached the level of the mundane, accessible to all for a small price. All that brings up a curious point about the way incense gets us in the mood for worship, for special times and places. If we smell it everywhere, is everything holy? Hazy can be the line between sacred and profane. A revealing account of this obscuring can be read in an outline catalogue for the Indian company Tiranga, which sells various joss sticks, including that of gulab, or rose. This meditation scent is most popularly used in the Indian rituals. It has been appreciated for decades as exceptional quality incense for deep calming meditation and for creating sacred space. Powerfully fragrant and long-lasting, the scent will linger in your rooms for hours. It evokes the feel of the tropical and evokes a warm, melodious scent. This unique scent is reminiscent of a warm summer evening. Tiranga knows that smells evoke and produce feeling. They calm us, create space, and place our lives within a sacred continuum. The catalogue description unintentionally shows the historical trajectory of religious devotion into modern life, and the continued use of sensual objects within that. Beginning with the traditional, more public setting of rituals and sacred spaces, the description shifts to one's own private rooms, and ultimately to that most private of spaces, one's own memories and experiences. On the other hand, the description can be read backwards to understand how one's life is situated within a grander mythical narrative. I myself can buy and use this product and legitimate my purchase by positioning my personal reminiscences within the collective long-standing tradition. The sacred is not erased so much as displaced, moved and multiplied to places beyond the temple. The formerly profane takes on an air of sanctity. The question remains, however, as to how far the sacred capital, as my friend and colleague Timothy Beale might phrase it, is spent down. Is the sacred worth as much in a living room as in a temple? Does it matter? As with the Tuareg, the uses of scents and incense in South Asia do not necessarily connect people with the time of the past. Modern marketing blurbs aside, so much as a space of the present. That modern Westerners make much of the relation of scent and memory tells us something about our understanding of ourselves. But as the religious studies scholar James McHugh has argued, smell in the history of South Asian religion and culture is social, connecting people to other people and to the things in the world. There is a social life of scent, establishing relations between people within space, in the here and now. There are good and bad, appropriate and inappropriate, auspicious and inauspicious fragrances. Of course, scents also connect humans with the gods, but for that we have to get the recipe right. In one of the most popular books in Indian history, the Mahabharata, a Brahmin ascetic named Suvarna gives an answer to the question of just why devas or gods desire flowers and incense. Here is a simple answer, of course. There is a simple answer, of course, that they, like the Hebrew Bible's God, are pleased with and gratified by the smells. Good smells increase joy, and that joy is then shared with the giver of offerings. Yet here too is a code for giving, and distinctions between smells become crucial to understand, lest one offend the divine. Savana tells that when selecting incense, resins are the best for the devas, while gugel is of the highest order. Also known as bdellium, gugel comes from the resin of a small tree in the myrrh family. Curiously, the only exception to the good resins is salaki, from the Boswellia serrata tree of the frankincense genus. Frankincense is to be used for the dechas, the enemies of the gods. One god's pleasure is another god's enemy. The Vedic tradition links Gugel to Agni, the god of fire, naturally. In those much older authoritative texts, it is not so much a sacrifice or offering as it is linked to the very body of Agni. The burning of Gugel ritualistically reconstitutes the god's body, which had been dismembered according to the ancient myths. As Agni's popularity diminished over time and other deities like Shiva, Vishnu and the great traditions of the goddesses, the devas such as Durga, Parvati and Kali, came to prominence among the devout, they too had their likes and dislikes. Medieval texts tell of Shiva's love of a specific type of gugel called Mahishaksa, while camphor and aloes wood are also highly praised. Gugel had been prominent across northern India for millennia, but due to massive harvesting it is now a threatened species, and the Indian government has banned its export. The impetus for much of the over-harvesting seems to have been some studies that suggest the active components in it reduce cholesterol, though other studies disprove this. Along with the fads surrounding so-called Ayurvedic medicine, some legitimate, some not, worldwide interest in the old shrubbery could spell its demise. The gods cannot be pleased. In Vrindavan, I was connected to these other people who had come to the city because of ancient stories told about Krishna and his life in the area, many of which are found in the Bhagavad Purana. Among other tales about the god Vishnu, and especially his avatar Krishna, we learn in these sacred texts about the evil demon Putana, whose name literally means stinker, who went out to destroy the infant Krishna by poisoning her breast and getting him to nurse from it. Krishna, great god that he is, literally sucks the life out of her, and her monstrous dead body is dismembered and burned. As the smoke rises, the stinker's body transforms into the pleasing smell of aloes wood. People from around the area of Raj were drawn to its bouquet and ultimately to the Lord Krishna, to whom they offered blessings or puja. Besides the scented offerings, and because Vraj is an area that has historically been a place of cowherding, Krishna is especially fond of offerings of dairy products like ghee, curds and yoghurt, and was infamously caught as a child stealing butter, a scene often depicted in devotional imagery. At Janmashtami, I watched the priests at a local temple pour litres and litres of spiced yoghurt and ghee over a small black statue of Lord Krishna, the liquid running over the slick stone body and draining off somewhere I couldn't see. When I returned to the ashram where I was staying, I found one of the priests with a keg of the liquid from the ritual offerings. He set it up in an open space and the community anxiously lined up to partake of the prasad, the holy leftovers given back to us humans by the gods. This is consecrated food, but unlike the transubstantiation of Holy Communion in the Roman Catholic Church, nobody seemed to mind its sloshing and spilling around. I too took, drank, and later ate. I left with a sweet taste in my mouth that eventually disappeared. Vivid images that stayed in my mind and camera for a long time. Echoes of ringing bells and chants that became confused. But today I cannot recollect the smells. In Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's story, The Red-Headed League, Sherlock Holmes is working out a mystery, as he does, back at his Baker Street digs. He tells his friend and assistant, Dr. Watson, that he needs to think about the details of the evidence surrounding their current conundrum. As usual, Holmes confounds his friend by doing what seems to be nothing, sitting in a chair with his eyes closed. It is quite a three-pipe problem, Holmes tells his quizzical companion, and I beg that you won't speak to me for 50 minutes. Doyle's story indicates another way that incense relates to time, not in a remembrance of time past, but in a present way of structuring chronology. Burning takes time. With practice and observation, the timing can be predicted. In turn, burning makes time. Holmes knows that it takes about 50 minutes to burn through 3 pipes worth of tobacco, which is an interesting number in the story, since 50 is not easily divisible by 3. When working on a mystery, Holmes is collecting his thoughts in the present instead of recollecting them from the past. Centuries ago, Buddhist monks in China made similar observations about the burning of incense. In China and on into Korea, Japan and the Indo-Chinese peninsula, incense began to be used to mark time. This occurred in political, economic and social realms, as well as religious ones. The visual, tangible, olfactory, spatial and protective dimensions are not erased, but sometimes took a back seat to this other function. In many contexts, the type of incense is key. In others, the variety doesn't matter. Many types of incense have been used across Southeast Asia. Prominent among them are aloes wood and camphor, both of which can be derived from native plants in the region. Frankincense appears in many places, though it is rarer because it must be imported from the Middle East. For Buddhist traditions, the most popular ingredient is sandalwood, native to India, but imported and used extensively in many forms in medieval and modern Chinese rituals. Tradition suggests that the first statue of the Buddha was carved out of white sandalwood and brought from India with Buddhist texts. Rosaries and other carvings are made from sandalwood because it is a fragrant material even without incineration. A mechanical clock ticks. An incense clock sizzles, consuming oxygen and resinous powder as it burns off seconds, minutes and hours. Some accounts tell of messengers who had limited amounts of time to sleep on their journeys. To ensure that they woke up on time, the messengers would put an incense cord or stick between their toes, light it and fall asleep. One can imagine the shock of the alarm. In agricultural settings, a particular length of burning incense would indicate the amount of water to be used for irrigation. Open the sluice and light the fire. When the incense is burned up, close the sluice. And on ships, incense was used to mark the times of sailors keeping watch and was as important as the compass. Based on the preceding, one might easily deduce how incense was used in sacred settings. Monastic Buddhist services occur at regular intervals throughout the day, much like prayers in Islam and Judaism and puja in Hinduism. Before mechanical clocks and without simply resorting to the sun, people needed a way to mark time. And so precisely measured formations of incense were burned to indicate the time between meditation and other activities. Incense was sometimes formed into sticks or cords, but the pulverised material was also laid out in trails on a flat template. Think of those cartoons with the trail of gunpowder leading to a keg of explosives, and carefully calculated to burn out in a specified time. There are many designs for these trails. One is called the Winding River incense, for obvious reasons, and hence the visual dimension of incense use cannot be overlooked here either. The timekeeping functions likely developed after an earlier use of incense that connected its pragmatic purposes with spiritual resonances. One export that Buddhist monks' texts and traditions took to China was the variety known as Tantric Buddhism, an esoteric set of practices and principles that regularly verge into mystical experiences. One practice came from a piece of Tantric scripture called the Incense seal of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. Avalokiteshvara, meaning the one who looks down at the world, is a popular figure, highly revered in Buddhist communities, often a male but sometimes also female. The being is a bodhisattva or Buddha-to-be, one who has renounced the final entry into nirvana and out of compassion stays around to aid others out of the cycle of samsara, the birth and rebirth cycles of reincarnation. One story tells of his having 1,000 arms, each of which aids the suffering of the world. Avalokiteshvara became synthesized with the Chinese goddess Guanyin, and in Japan took on the form of Amida Buddha or the Kannon Bosatsu. In the ritual of the incense seal, powdered incense is laid out on a template, a seal, that takes the form of the verbal characters of a mantra in Siddham script. If you've seen the stylized characters of the Hindu sacred syllable for Om, you might be able to imagine this. The trail of incense is burned, and as the powder burns, mantras are chanted. The experience brings the practitioner through several stages toward deeper enlightenment. The text ends thus: use sandalwood, lotus, or other fine incense in such a burner, and every day the diamond realm of tantric realization will shine brighter and brighter. The incense burner pattern truly manifests the tantric teaching. Perform the various mudra, symbolic hand gestures, and recite the mantra Om Vajra Dharma Hri. Hail to the adamantine Dharma of 1,000-armed Kannon. If one utilises this mantra, all calamity and sickness will be avoided. One will be reborn in the highest paradise after death and be a facilitator of the liberation of all. Rely on this teaching, practice it, and perfect enlightenment will be quickly attained. Note here that the type of incense is not as important as the pattern in which it is laid out, and the connection between the burning and bodily performances of hand gestures and spoken words. This rite is not an offering as much as an incantation. Avalokiteshvara is invoked, but unlike the Hebrew Jehovah, Hindu Shiva, or Taoist Litiagol, this being does not require sacrifice and offering. Incense is used as a basic time marker, but can also be used to attain enlightenment. That incense is used in pragmatic as well as mystical ways indicates how incense permeates many layers of religious life. One is not more important than the other. The sacred and profane mix and merge in strange ways among the senses. Along with the seeds of Buddhism and garden design, basic practices and accoutrements of incense rites came to Japan in the 6th century. In general, incense was burned as a way to invoke the Buddha's presence and as an act of purifying a ritual space. Several types of aromatic plant matter were initially used, such as sandalwood, cloves, and camphor, while unique combinations of materials were created among different sects and monasteries. Incense use reached a new level of refinement when the Chinese priest Ganjian travelled to Japan in the 8th century, bringing both Buddhist doctrines and fresh incense blends and recipes imports that had significant effects on the Japanese use of incense for centuries to come. By the Heian period, an aristocratic industry and culture emerged around incense. Its secularized use in Japan became known as soradake, empty burning, which was distinguished from soneiko, offering to the Buddha. In the 9th century, one Prince Kaya took on incense as his personal royal hobby, becoming a master blender, codifying the 6 scents and helping to usher in what came to be called the Golden Age of Innocence. We know something of these 6 scents today because they were defined by the Buddhist poet priest Jacoren in his 20th century work, Selections from the Incense Anthologies, Kunshu Rishu. The blends were called Plum Blossom, Lotus Leaf, Royal Steward, Chrysanthemum Flower, Fallen Leaves, and Black. The names were meant to be evocative and did not indicate that these substances were actually the ones used. Jacaran's anthologies contain extensive recipes for blending, and we learn, for example, that Prince Naya's version of Plum Blossom contained aloe, seashells, spikenard, sandalwood, cloves, musk, and amber. The amount of each ingredient and the process of blending were crucial, while the final creation might also entail burying the mixture in the ground for days or weeks, allowing it to age. Prince Kai himself was an ancestor of Murasaki Shikibu, famous for writing what is called the world's first novel, The Tale of Genji, in the 11th century. The story of Prince Genji describes both everyday life and the complexities of social etiquette during the period, referring frequently to the scents of incense, which were used within particular places and as a perfume. Clothes were often hung over a special rack, with an incense holder sitting below it. Cooking the incense would enfume the fabrics. The tale of Genji also indicates how courtship and other interpersonal dynamics were mediated through scent, at the expense of seeing and hearing. People came to be known for their scents, and characters such as Kaori Chujo, the fragrant captain, and Neomiya, his perfumed highness, appear at points in the story. The praise and passing of incense became so heightened that there developed a way of incense, kodo, that mirrored the now more remembered way of tea, chado. Scented media is social media. Perhaps you have visited the grand spaces of Chartres Cathedral, the Blue Mosque of Istanbul, St. John of the Divine in New York City, or one of the many temples of Orissa, Beijing, or Los Angeles. Recall for a moment the vast space and the sensual encounters that brought you more fully into that place. It may have been the diagonal streams of sunlight pouring through coloured glass, dust motes floating caught in the light's gleam. Prayers, chants, or music may have been heard, while the sound of shuffling feet alerted you to the presence of others. Now imagine not just the images and echoes of this holy space, but also the smells. The frankincense, sweet yet pungent, washing away the pollution of the vehicles, the odour of the vendors, and sweaty bodies on the street outside. The latter sense is somewhat more difficult to reimagine, for several reasons, not just because smells can be fleeting. When I visited but a few of the 3,000 mosques of Istanbul, I was fortunate to have a guide to fill in the sensual details that are missing from these spaces in modern life. Architectural historian Nina Ergin has been studying the mosques of Istanbul, created during the Ottoman period, 1453 to 1922, and she showed me several of the mosques, noting their visual designs but also pointing out the ways they might have been sensually apprehended before the secularization of Turkey disbanded. Many larger mosque operations during the Ottoman period Many of the taxes and spoils of war went toward the maintenance of mosque life. Although strictly speaking a mosque, masjid, is simply a place of prostration, and there are no strict requirements as to how the building should be constructed, it's the activity inside that counts. Ottoman mosques were community-wide complexes that incorporated madrasas or schools, baths, gardens and mausoleums, as well as the various infrastructures necessary to maintain all that, including kitchens and places for workers to do their tasks. The great mosques designed by Mimar Sinan, chief Ottoman architect in the 16th century, are still in use today, along with many small mosques tucked away among the ambling streets of the city. Sinan's mosques include the Suleymaniye, Rustam Pasha and Shehzade mosques, though today they are each sensually apprehended in ways unlike that intended by Sinan. Master architect that he was, the designs were created to be not only visually spectacular, but also acoustically resonant and aromatically evocative. A number of the mosques even employed a person responsible for scenting the place. Known as the Buhurku, this person, as well as the Quran reciters, lamplighters and cooks, helped create sensual ambience. As Quranic passages were recited from prominently placed platforms, incense would burn and drift with the words across the open space of the prayer hall. The word of Allah became tangible, audible, visible and fragrant, synthetically drawing the devout into relation with the divine. With the demise of the Ottoman Empire and the secularisation of the state, funds for these types of services dried up. The soup kitchen at the Suleymaniye Mosque is now a restaurant that caters to tourists, and some of the baths connected to the mosques are also oriented to bring outsiders money in. All that is to say, our understanding of sacred architecture in the present age is primarily one of vision, missing much of the smell and sound of spaces. Visiting and analysing buildings, we discuss columns and arches, windows and aisles. Every once in a while we notice the way sound bounces off the walls, but these examples pale in comparison to the place's full uses in the past. A larger issue is at stake with these historical memories of Heian Japan and Ottoman Turkey. As we reconstruct the past, we would be well advised to attend to the senses of the ages. Not only has the smell of incense and perfume and other aromatics drifted from our memories, it has also vanished from our histories. A particular scent may take us back to a particular time and place, but we cannot willy-nilly conjure up the way something smelled in the past. Processes of globalisation, colonisation and secularisation, mixed with ever-new technologies, have remade the world, connecting groups never before connected, producing a global village of sorts. These same processes have simultaneously remade our sense perception. We simply don't smell like we used to, and flashing neon signs no longer capture our attention as they might have a half century ago. But to say we live in a media-saturated world is not quite accurate. We live in an audio-visual media-saturated world. Our media attends to and bombards primarily only two of our senses, hearing and seeing. Leave it to the madmen of Madison Avenue, where advertising must conjure new spells to lead the masses into new conversions. They know we need new triggers to outpace the old audiovisual tricks, and so one emerging area is scent branding. Entire companies have shot up based on this principle, and the magazine Adweek recently called it branding's final frontier. Major corporations are buying in. At the heart of the new frontier is creating signature scents, special mixtures designed for specific settings. Taking into account demographics like race, age and gender, Sony has toyed with scents to allure women towards their mostly male-purchased electronics. Along with the product being sold, the pleasant scent of, say, cut grass doesn't go over well in Victoria's Secret. Research and development facilities consider a range of variables as they develop new recipes. The Mandarin Oriental Hotel in New York City has a scent called Sequoia that glides through the lobby, greeting visitors who have just walked in off Columbus Circle. Walking through most any shopping mall in North America or the rest of the post-industrial, consumer-driven world, you've already had a similar experience. Passing an Abercrombie and Fitch, subtle muscular scents waft out the door, while Cinnabon's aromas are more overstated. One new company called Scent Air, based in North Carolina, explains its big idea on its website. By targeting the senses, brands establish a stronger and enduring emotional connection with their customers. The sleek audiovisual site gives some interesting world history on the use of odours, while eliding any direct religious references. In the end, they suggest experiences matter. Our sense of smell is the strongest way to add more to the customer experience. Donna Sturgess, president of a neurological marketing firm called Biology, similarly says in ways that might stir the bones of Maimonides, pleasant, subtle scents lift our moods and impact buying behaviour. Multiple studies have shown strong correlates between pleasant smells, happy feelings, and thus people lingering longer in those places. Neural marketing, scent branding, the power of contrived sensual experience to make us happy and comfortable, to connect, linger, and ultimately buy. Is this the new age, or is it entirely old? Rather than simply and cynically reacting against advertising's seemingly more intrusive tactics, after all, they're just doing what advertising does in a capitalist's economy. Might we rethink religious history itself and wonder how particular mosques, sects, and even new religious movements branded themselves? Perhaps a history of incense in sacred spaces is a history of scent branding, of creating an experience that lifts moods and affects behaviour, of distinguishing one's space and thus oneself from another. There is one final consideration, that incense, or tobacco, or wood logs, or houses, takes time to burn, also entails an end to the burning. The substance gets used up and can no longer be used as fuel for the fire. This fact provides a characteristic of incense unlike what we have seen so far. Stones are marked by their relative permanence, their unchanging nature in the span of human life, while incense is temporary, ephemeral. The English poet Walter Savage Landor once said, "No ashes are lighter than those of incense, and few things burn out sooner." Religious traditions, seen historically, might appear solid, staunch, set in their ways. Indeed, part of the authority of churches and temples stems from their abilities to create an aura of eternity, of having lasted unchanging over time. We recite creeds from a millennium and a half ago, read sacred scriptures from 3 millennia ago, and conduct, or so we believe, rituals to the deities the same way we always have. It is as it was. Wedged within these mythical creations of solid history are the passing, fleeting, fading. Poet William Wordsworth ably gets at the transitory temperament of life in Intimations of Immortality. Everything in life at a younger age seemed apparelled in celestial light. But over time the rainbow comes and goes, and lovely is the rose. But yet I know, where'er I go, that there hath passed away a glory from the earth. Beauty and grace, presence and light are not permanent states of experience on this earth. We grow older and ultimately are able to see only the trails of glory that passed before our eyes. C.S. Lewis likewise locates fleeting glimpses of glory within the natural world. Lewis knows the senses guide us, and through such experiences people desire something that transcends the here and now experience, at least for those predisposed to do so. Lewis outlines this yearning, this longing, in deeply multisensate language. That unnameable something, desire for which pierces us like a rapier at the smell of bonfire, the sound of wild ducks flying overhead, the title of the well at the world's end, the opening lines of Kubla Khan, the morning cobwebs in late summer, or the noise of falling waves. In the end, we're left with the possibilities of paying attention, of sensing with a kind of divine perception, in order to capture those moments in the blink of an eye. Religious traditions operate with the ephemeral, and in many instances it becomes a reminder of our own fleeting, changing nature. At other times, the fleeting experiences are glimpses of glory of paradise. Heaven, or the pure land, remind us that this life may be fluctuating, but there is another life with more surety, more lasting harmony. The religious point is to pay attention, to feel now. Incense reminds us not merely of our own selves, Proust-like, but about the passing nature of our lives and how that might itself be something holy. Poet Diane Ackerman brings the ephemeral and the holy together through the sense of smell. It may be, too, that smells move us so profoundly, in part because we cannot utter their names. In a world sayable and lush, where marvels offer themselves up readily for verbal dissection, smells are often right on the tip of our tongues, but no closer, and it gives them a kind of magical distance, a mystery, a power without a name, a sacredness. If frankincense was given as a gift alongside gold and precious stones, the key difference is that gold and stones are of a substance built to last. Their value lies in their solidity. The value of incense derives from its disappearance. To get what is desired from this object means that it must be eliminated, burned up. Such holy frivolousness.